There's another Franken accuser.
Yeah, her name is Lindsay Menz, 33-year-old woman. But she said in 2010, while she was taking a picture with Al Franken at the Minnesota State Fair, he grabbed her buttocks while taking the picture.
Are you sure she wasn't confusing him for George H.W. Bush?
What is up with guys and women grabbing, playing, you know what, while they're taking a photo? Keep your hands to yourself.
Oh, I'd just be beset with grief if Al Franken was forced out of office by his fellow travelers on the left, because that's sort of what's happening as the left tries to reckon with the era of the Clintons in the 90s, which, of course, has been extended 25 years. But all of these pieces that continue to come out, and Democrat politicians who continue to say, well, we should have believed the Clinton accusers, as Congresswoman Jackie Spear from California said. And what Hillary knew, the Caitlin Flanagan follow-up piece in The Atlantic to her piece last week about the reckoning the left needs to do with Bill Clinton. And I believe Juanita Broderick and Slate and all of the mea culpas and the recriminations from the left, Matt Iglesias in Vox, Clinton should have resigned from office. Oh, boy, isn't this convenient? Attempting to do penance for playing politics in the 90s and rallying to his defense so they can have moral standing in the present to opine on bad actors, particularly those of a political persuasion that they find repugnant and that they want to decimate, starting with the occupant of the Oval Office. This is not standard setting by the left, in my estimation. But let's get somebody else's viewpoint on this. We're pleased to be joined by David Harsanyi, who, of course, is a nationally syndicated columnist and senior editor at The Federalist, thefederalist.com. He's got a piece on this topic as well right now. Liberals' sudden concern about Bill Clinton's behavior is cynical and self-serving. So I think we're at least starting from the same premise. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And so Franken and Moore and all the recriminations from some of those leading lights of the left that I mentioned, how should we understand this?
Well, I mean, retroactively condemning Bill Clinton doesn't seem on the up and up. It doesn't seem that there's any reckoning, actually, because there's really no consequences for doing it, especially, long after the fact. But more than that, in 2016, Bill Clinton had a standing ovation at the DNC. There were no pieces that I remember talking about a reckoning or believing Juanita Broderick or anything like that. Moreover, when you read the pieces that you mentioned from Iglesias and Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times, they spent half or more of their columns throat clearing and blame shifting away from, blaming conservatives for why they couldn't believe Juanita Broderick initially. That doesn't bode well for them changing, for sort of moral consensus on this moving forward.
And now we have, Hillary Clinton was on with radio host Rita Cosby, and she's talking about Al Franken and, of course, Roy Moore. And she said we have a sitting president in the Oval Office, accused of sexual assault. And I just thought that was so strange coming from her at this point in time. I think she should be the last person questioning President Trump's behavior. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not because of what her husband did. It's because she participated in smearing and sliming and trying to undermine the women who came forward in the 90s about her husband. She was an active participant in undermining them and destroying some of them. So she certainly shouldn't be talking about it. And also, it brings up, not every allegation is equally credible, or maybe not every allegation has all the same sort of evidence. So I think we need to make sure to treat each instance, separately.
Ross Douthat has a piece in the New York Times too, making an assessment of this, and he starts by saying, "Look, perhaps, not perhaps." He says Republicans were too partisan. The Starr Report was too prurient in the 90s. There's too much Clinton hate that overshadowed the substance of the case against him. But he says, I went back and looked at the Starr Report. I leafed through books by Stephanopoulos and Joe Klein and Michael Isikoff, looked at Troopergate and Whitewater, other first scandals. Basically said, after doing all this reading, I'm not sure my reasonable middle ground is actually reasonable. It may be that conservatives in the 90s were simply right about Clinton, that once he failed to resign, he really deserved to be impeached, despite the fact that maybe they were two partisan, maybe there were some absurd conspiracy theories. But Bill Clinton, with all that was stacked against him in the 1990s, would never have survived today, is essentially Starr's contention, and frankly, a concession being made by many on the left right now.
Yeah, I mean, a few things. There's always conspiracy theories. There's always partisanship. That's nothing new with any president. But more than that, and Michelle Goldberg made the same point about how they couldn't really believe, or it was difficult to believe, Juanita Broaddrick because of all the noise, all the conspiracy theories. Juanita Broaddrick's story was brought forward by NBC News, not by, Newsmax or some
good point.
right-wing site. These stories were all brought forward by mainstream media news organizations. I'm not sure why those people had a hard time believing NBC News.
Well, do you think?
So,
do you think Bill Clinton should come forward now and apologize or say something, or just let this go? Be a strange twist of events if he did.
He's useless to them now, so, I don't really care what Bill Clinton has to say. I do believe Juanita Broaddrick. I think it was very credible. People forget, by the way, there are other people out there that were reported on, not by right-wingers, but by reporters who had very similar stories about sexual assault and rape in Bill Clinton. I think that he should talk about those things. An apology means nothing at this point.
So where do you think this goes with the status of Al Franken and the prospect that, given just what we know about the nature of many individuals in Congress through the annals of American history, probably won't be limited to Al Franken, just as we see scandals brewing at state houses, including our own here in Illinois. How do you see this playing out in the near term?
I think it depends on the person. Al Franken can step down and there's no political price to pay because there's a Democratic governor and they'll just name another senator. So that's why the Roy Moore situation, I think, is a little bit different. But, if you have credible allegations of assault and bad behavior, people should step down. I think that we should all come together on that. I'm just not sure if that's going to be the case because of partisanship.
And what about the issue more generally in culture for people that aren't in public office but have, frankly, more sway than people in public office, like Hollywood elites and media elites? The story over the weekend about Russell Simmons adding to the allegations against Brett Ratner as well, amid all of the other kind of A-list celebrities that are now in the crosshairs. And do you think there's a possibility for a bit of a renaissance of standards and an improvement of the culture that's been debased by some of these elites, where people react and say, okay, well, I don't have any faith in these people who I'm, for some reason, was otherwise place some importance on their viewpoints on the range of issues affecting the human condition. And so I'm going to think more carefully about the people and the institutions in which I place my trust.
Man, I wish that were the case. I think
okay.
I think the big lesson here is let's not elevate these people to as they're politicians, they're actors, they're producers. They're not any smarter than the average person, and they're certainly not any more moral than the average person. Sometimes when I hear these stories, I'm like, man, I live in a bubble. I can't believe people are doing these things. I can't believe that men believe they can act this way.
I know.
In the real world, there would be far greater consequences for these actions. Bill Clinton, there were no consequences for what he did. None. He remained president, and he was celebrated after, and he became a very wealthy man. So,
right.
Listen, I hope that people start to be more skeptical and treat, and I hope we do, like I said before, come to some moral consensus. It's not okay to grab women or to do the horrible things that some of these men have done. But I just want to say, I also worry a little bit about sort of mob mentality, where it is very easy to destroy people with allegations.
Yeah.
And just to keep that in mind, we don't have to, we have to be diligent and make sure we don't, we take the evidence that's presented and not just to believe everyone because it's convenient for us politically or in any other way culturally.
And don't you think it's easier for, extortion to be going on? So women saying, oh, you did this to me, and even if it's not true or not, they'll pay them off just so that they'll go away.
I'm sure that happens in the world as well. But, what's kind of a little bit, most of these allegations have come true, right? I mean, it seems to be true. Spacey or Weinstein or Franken or whoever or more. There seems to be evidence that what people are saying is true, right? So it puts people in a tough spot, especially voters. They're not sure what to do.
Right.
They're not sure who to believe, and sometimes their calculus, as it was in the 90s, and it is with Roy Moore. People are like, well, he's a terrible person, but if I elect this other person, they're going to do things that I think are immoral as well. So I have to make a choice here, and I'm going to choose the maybe pedophile.
And the first person that accused Roy Moore of underage abuse, she spoke out this morning, less than an hour ago, on the Today Show, Leah Korfman. So that's not going to help his situation at all.
Well, and to the other point that you were making, David, about you still have to exercise some restraint and assess the quality of the allegation. Now you have people preemptorily coming out, high-profile people, Ryan Seacrest coming out saying, hey, somebody at E-Television I worked with 10 years ago has filed a complaint, and I'm happy to have the corporate honchos investigate it to the fullest extent. Deadline.com reporting that, according to a source close to the situation, one of those, that this woman wanted a substantial cash payment from Seacrest to keep quiet. He won't do it, so he's not allowing himself to be beaten up in a back alley. He's coming public with the allegation and saying, I never did anything, and I'm happy to have the investigation done, but I'm also not going to get extorted, is essentially what he's saying.
Right. It's like with Kevin Spacey. Someone accused him of, attacking them when they were 14 years old, and he's like, well, I don't really remember. It might have happened,
Yeah, right.
Not the kind of
right.
That's not what I would say, right? I
right.
mean, I would feel like this is nuts. I would never do something like that, on and on. So, I mean, we can also see in the way people react, though, you have to be careful about that as well, because sometimes lawyers tell you to, to restrain yourself, things like that. But generally, I think people need to make up their minds. And it's going to be difficult because obviously it's not ending anytime soon.
Please tell me that it's not going to go to the place where we have what we had with that Ohio State Supreme Court Justice,
oh boy,
Mr. O'Neill, where we're going to get to a place where you're going to have public officials or candidates for public office decide they are going to preemptively disclose their entire sexual history or think that they need to. I don't want to read that.
I don't either. I mean, I feel... Honestly, I'll be honest. I feel gross writing and talking about this in a way. It's just so ugly, and quite often you're not sure if it's true or what to make of it, and it's just a difficult position for people to be in. Now, when it comes to Hollywood and stuff like that, I don't know what the repercussions will be, but in politics there are, you're talking about legislation not being passed, things of that nature. So it makes it, I think, more difficult for people to navigate. He
is David Harsanyi, nationally syndicated columnist, senior editor at thefederalist.com. His most recent piece, Liberals' Sudden Concern about Bill Clinton's behavior is cynical and self-serving. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer lines.